Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast When I Became a Gator. I'm your host, Vi Payulert. This podcast will focus on the stories of various alumni around the country in hopes of bringing together the Gator Nation one alumni at a time. We are back with season 2, where I connect with alumni, see where they are now, and how their time at UF shaped their lives, careers, and passions. This week, I sat down to talk to Jon Tanawan. Welcome, Jon, to the podcast.
Of course. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me, Vi. My name is Jon Tanawan, but I think most people know me as Jon. I'm a Filipino-American that was born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida. So nice area in Tampa Bay. And I actually got my bachelor's in food science and human nutrition while I was at the University of Florida, and I graduated in 2014.
And can you tell our listeners, do you recall that moment when you found out that you were going to go to the University of Florida, and were you excited? Were you nervous? Tell us how you felt when you found out you were going to UF.
Oh, for sure. So I think we talked about this prior, but I went to an IB high school, and when you're a Florida high schooler and you're an IB, there's a lot of anticipation and a lot of excitement about, who's going to UF? Because historically, my high school had a lot of people that would just kind of go to UF in droves. So I just remember that week, there's anticipation building up. It was Friday the 13th, actually. And I remember just getting the email, there were no smartphones in 2010. So I was just logging onto my Gmail, trying to see what happened. And I just got the letter on my desktop. And I just remember being ecstatic. I had a couple of cousins that were at UF before I got there. And I just remember them saying nothing but positive things about their experience and what they were involved with. Even outside of the Asian American community, they just really had a lot of formative experiences. And I was just really excited to kind of be part of that.
Yeah, I totally, +1 on the IB, going into hordes of, UF was what was it called? A filter school where everyone would go to. So you did know friends and friends that you went to high school with, and you said, family members, but it helped to have someone, a friendly face that you might have known in a sea of new people. And can you tell us what you were involved with on campus, and how did you get involved? Did you know people who were also involved? Did you have friends who were you went to high school that were also getting involved? How did you start getting involved on campus?
Oh, for sure. So I think part of what kind of led me into getting involved with the community was my first year of UF. I actually didn't live on campus. I lived in an apartment off of, I think that was 20th Avenue, 20th Street, with my cousin, Christine Ramos. And she was a year older than me, and she was very involved in the Filipino Student Association. So I just remember moving to Gainesville, and the day my parents and her mom left and moved into our new apartment, she was like, okay, take a nap because we are going to dinner and you're going to meet a bunch of people tonight at this gathering. So I was like, oh, okay, this is happening very quickly. And I just remember going to, I think it was Zach Chang and Daniel Patterson's apartment. And I heard about ASA through there. And once I went to ASA, that was just kind of the gateway into becoming very involved in the Asian American community. I was involved heavily with FLP and FSA my freshman year. And from freshman year onwards, I definitely was able to spend a lot of time with AKM. I did AKM for, I think it was 2011 with Maria Canonizado. I did Circle my senior year with Irene Ng as the director. And I was also ASA director my senior year. So I had a lot of fun with ASU, and it kind of also gave me a platform to kind of extend my involvement past ASU. I was also in student government, involved as a cabinet director and in Florida Blue Key. So I was definitely very busy.
You were super busy. And just for our listeners, Jon threw out a lot of acronyms, but ASU or AASU, AKA, could you just share some of the acronyms?
Sorry.
Know what it is.
Sorry, it's probably alphabet soup right now. So ASU is the Asian American Student Union, the umbrella organization for a lot of the cultural affinity sub-organizations. And under that was FSA, the Filipino Student Association. And I think I mentioned as well FLP, the Freshman Leadership Program, which was kind of the mentorship program ASU had for incoming freshmen to help adjust to campus life at UF. and Asian Kaleidoscope Month was our celebration of Asian American heritage and culture that normally took place in the fall. So
yeah, super, a lot of programming. And then also you mentioned the Asian American Student Assembly, which you were also, I believe, director of, but that was like our premier like fall event to just welcome folks back to campus, get, freshmen excited about obviously coming to UF and also just getting involved. So that was also one of our premier events. And I remember that was also really fun. I think you have some photos to share. If folks are listening via the podcast, you could click our YouTube link to see the video or the photos that John John's going to share. But John, can you share the first photo you have just to walk down memory lane a little bit?
Of course. So here is the first photo I'd like to share. This was actually during ASA 2013. So that was during my senior year. I was co-directors with Rifat Bimani, and we were able to just kind of welcome the University of Florida to our Asian American Student Union and the Asian American community by throwing basically just celebration of our community, our organizations, our affinity organizations. And to the right of me in the photo is actually our guest speaker, Dante Bosco. So Dante Bosco, when we were growing up, he was in the movie Hook as Rufio. And I think around the time ASA was happening, he was kind of more well known for voicing Prince Zuko on Avatar. So it was super fun getting him to speak to us about empowerment and just kind of his experiences in Hollywood and being an Asian American in that space. And it was just very memorable for me because, like we mentioned earlier, it was kind of like a full circle thing for me. I remember just being at ASA 2010 and just being so almost overwhelmed in a really good way about just like the strength of community and the sense of belonging I felt, and just the kind of like the atmosphere where you just didn't really have to kind of, I guess, explain some of the things about how you grew up and how like things are. And a lot of people just had that mutual understanding, which I never really had growing up in a larger context like that. So I shared this one just because it was like a kind of like a homecoming for me. Being able to give back to the community through planning ASA and just having a lot of fun working with everyone in the process. And
if you're just listening to the podcast, I'll describe the photo for you. It's Jon surrounded by, it looks like a huge committee of folks, and also just representation just of all folks from Asian American communities and also folks who aren't probably identified people of color. So just, again, just representative of an inclusive community that the Asian American Student Union like really promoted. It didn't matter if you were Vietnamese, Chinese, Filipino, you could have been involved. And I felt like ASU was very welcoming in that way. Okay, so next photo. Thanks for sharing that one. What is your next photo?
So my next photo, I was actually looking through all of my tagged photos, trying to find some of some of the most memorable moments. And I actually chose one that's relatively regular, I guess, if I could put it that way. It's a candid that's taken at what I believe is one of the first ASU general body meetings of a semester. And I chose this photo for a couple of reasons. One, it's candid. And it kind of captured the energy of those, like, especially at the beginning of the semester when everyone's, excited to meet everyone, excited to hang out again. Everyone's having a good time. And I chose this photo as well because even though it's candid and it's just, I didn't even actually remember this photo being taken, I am still in regular contact with a lot of the people in the frame of this photo. Even in the background, I see like one of my friends, Ray Brown from FSA, we like go on Apple Watch fitness challenges every week against each other. And I'll be at a wedding later this week with some of like people I'm sitting in the row with. And I think when I saw this picture, it kind of warmed my heart because it did really show me that, even after being, I think at this point, maybe half a decade from graduating, I still have these very rich relationships and friendships and networks that I was able to get from being involved in the Asian American community while I was at UF.
Yeah, that's so telling. And do you remember what year you were in school?
Okay, so this photo, I want to say it was probably spring 2013. So I was a junior in college. I was getting very involved. I forgot to mention earlier, I was in a fraternity as well when I was in college. I was in Pi Delta Psi fraternity, and I think we had some sort of segment in the meeting. So I just realized I'm wearing letters in the picture. So that was part of my involvement as well in the Asian American community. That was actually very formative for me as well.
Yeah, super cool. And again, like when folks look at our podcast link on YouTube, you can see the photo. Check out the 2 photos Jon shared. But again, another diverse photo with like multiple groups of people in it, and just again showing really how welcoming the ASU community was. Like it didn't matter what you identified as or what your ethnicity was, really just welcoming all around. So thanks, Jon, for sharing those photos.
Of course.
So tell us what you studied at UF, and did you really know that you wanted to do that going into college? And really, how did you find your passion amidst all the student involvement that you were involved with? As you mentioned previously, you were involved in many things. So how did you find the time to, one, study, and also how did you decide on food science, and like was that a passion of yours previously?
Of course. So I think when I came to UF, I came in as a pre-med, and I knew that one day I would want to be a physician. And my major at Preview that I selected was microbiology and cell science. And I think it was just one of those things. My mom is a laboratory technologist, so I just kind of like, my mom likes looking at microscopes. Maybe I'll like get into that too, because it was broadly pre-med. And I actually ended up kind of looking further in my sophomore year when the tracking for the courses are deviating between nutrition and microbiology. And I realized that my passion is really with working with people and applying that knowledge in ways that you can create change on an appreciable level right away. So I made a major change in sophomore year. Luckily, like the tracks were very interchangeable for the first 2 years. So I wasn't delayed or anything, but I ended up picking nutrition just because there was a lot of opportunities to just get involved right away and help the community in Alachua County. And from there, I was actually able to kind of start this passion that kind of continues with me to this day. I got involved with the Emerging Pathogens Institute as an intern when I was an undergrad. I helped give out flu vaccines in Alachua County and talk about health promotion activities, like eating a healthy lifestyle, what to do to avoid getting the flu. And I was also involved in the Equal Access Clinic at UF, which I also heard about through my major. And it helped me kind of really get into advocating and working and caring for underserved populations. And I honestly think that my major in nutrition really did actually help me in medical school. So I went to med school after, and I actually had a really great background in nutrition, and it helped a lot in teaching patients with diabetes about, glycemic indices and like how to avoid, spiking their sugar levels, and how to, opt for food that's more applicable for their kind of disease states. So, it was very prescient, I would say, choosing that as my major, just because it really did set me up for a lot of success in a way I would have expected when it came to my rotations in med school.
Yeah, that's so cool. And could you tell our listeners that don't know you personally, where you ended up going for med school, and just like how that experience really kind of shifted your perspective after graduating UF, and tell us what you did after graduating.
Of course. So I will say that I elected to choose a fairly unconventional approach to my medical education. After I graduated from UF with my bachelor's, I ended up moving to the Philippines the next month after I graduated, and I started medical school in the Philippines. The Philippines, I guess for a little bit of background, the Philippines has had a long history of providing medical professionals to the United States, probably since 1898, 1905, around there, when the Philippines was a U.S. Commonwealth. So there's a lot of similarities in our education systems between the United States and the Philippines for medical education. So I knew that was a strength I would have from going there. And it was one of those things where I really did want to spend some time in a different setting. I guess with seeing my background as someone who was very involved at UF, I just wanted to see what it was like to be in such a different setting. And I guess I just went probably geographically as far as possible from Gainesville. But it was a great experience. I learned a lot about what it really means to be, I guess, like a Filipino American, kind of straddling the cultures between between my country of origin and the place I grew up. And it was just a very interesting experience in terms of global health, in terms of personal development. And I made some really great friends out of it too. And of course, graduated my MD. So that's always good too. So
yeah, always graduating is a good thing. And were there any, but you just touched upon it being Filipino American, but were there any kind of misconceptions of being American in the Philippines versus being Filipino American, and anything that stood out to you while you were there?
Oh, for sure. 100%. I think this is definitely one of those things where I think in psychology, when I was in high school, they kind of had this part of segment on collectivist versus individualistic cultures. And one observation I made as an intern out in the Philippines was there's actually a different approach sometimes that we had to take to counseling patients and helping, get the right history questions out, because for a lot of Filipinos, especially those in the rural setting where I was fortunate enough to work, they come to rely on like a paternalistic model of healthcare. Basically, it's kind of like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. Versus in the United States, where I feel like we're very adept at having this collaborative model, where it's kind of like, let's get feedback from one another, see where we need to go and how we can work together to get you there. So that's one of the things I kind of noticed as kind of a cultural difference between the two. And I think, as a person, it was just a very interesting experience, because you realize that I clinged so strongly to my Filipino identity as a Filipino American living in the United States and being at UF. And when it came to moving to the Philippines and, being a student there and working there as an intern, you realize I started clinging to more and more, I guess, my American sensibilities, the kind of being a little bit outspoken, always kind of voicing your opinion in a way that's respectful, but still voicing your opinion. Not being afraid to go first for kind of stuff like that. So it was definitely eye-opening, because you don't realize the differences culturally until you're immersed in your culture of origin. You realize that there definitely are some differences in how we were raised.
Yeah, that totally resonates with me. And I think that having different perspectives, it does help you, I guess, be well-rounded now that you're going to be a medical professional. It's like you've already had that experience from not only different types of people, but different types of cultures as well, to practice in the Philippines versus American practice. So that's going to be very interesting for you moving forward. I'm sure that you found that time very valuable.
Oh, definitely.
And my other question for you was, do you have any advice for those who are thinking about studying abroad? And, not even just medical, but in any other post-grad degrees. Do you have any advice for undergrad students or graduate students thinking about studying abroad?
Oh, for sure. I will say that, I would say no experience is perfect. It was definitely a mixed bag at times in the Philippines, but at the end of the day, that development and resiliency and that development of kind of understanding what you stand for as a person, and your kind of guiding principles for what you want to do with your career and your passions is something that definitely came to, I guess, kind of a head when I was in the Philippines, just because you're in a foreign surrounding, you're under a lot of, different stress, just because a lot of stuff is so unfamiliar. And I think that experience was just so formative in the sense that I really had to bear down and be like, okay, so what do you really want to do? And what can you get from this experience that's so foreign and so different to help you get to where you want to be? And it's not just, not just the medical setting, just being very goal driven and understanding obstacles ahead of you. I think I've developed a lot of resilience from my experience out there. And I think for anyone going anywhere to a different country, whether it be for medical school or for the Peace Corps or even studying abroad for a semester, you can definitely develop a very strong sense of self-reliance and resilience through doing that.
Yeah, I totally recommend. I mean, if you have the means and methods to do it, just to study abroad, like you said, maybe it's just a semester or a weekend, etc. But it definitely kind of shapes kind of your outlook moving forward in your life. I remember I also studied abroad in China for 3 months, and it really coming back, it's just the world is so much bigger than your own bubble, and that there are bigger issues around the globe that are affecting how people live, how people are getting healthcare. So it really does shape your outlook. I totally agree with you, for the rest of your life. And you will always remember that experience. Like, you'll always be like, yeah, those 4 or 5 years, that was my experience. So totally that resonates with me. And what were some perks of living abroad? Any fun stories you could share with our listeners?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I guess what a lot of people don't realize when you're like living in America is huge. Geographically, America is just gigantic. It's ridiculous. And when I was living out in Asia before the pandemic, of course, there was this very increased, I guess it was a kind of like this increased interest in the industry of low-cost travel. So when I was in the Philippines, we would get a lot of holidays off. Like, the Philippines is a Catholic country, so we get like random feast days off, and we would get, a lot of breaks off for national holidays, more so than we do in the US. And at that point, we would see kind of stuff like, oh, there's a $50 round trip to Hong Kong. Let's spend for a long weekend in Hong Kong and see what's going on. And it was just so much fun, just because it was definitely like, I don't want to say it was that cliche backpacker kind of thing, but it was. And you're meeting a bunch of different people in a hostel. You're eating really good local food. I don't speak a lick of Cantonese, so it was definitely a learning experience for me. And it was just so much fun. You learn a lot about yourself when you travel, and I'm very grateful for that experience of living in Asia and having that accessibility to just kind of explore a lot of new cultures while being respectful of, seeing where people come from. I think one of the most fun parts too was I would just kind of post stuff on Instagram. I'm in Hong Kong, I'm eating an egg tart, or I'm in Hongdae in Korea, and a lot of friends I had from college would write back, and they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I've been there with my grandma or my aunt or my mom. You should definitely try this place or try to eat this food while you're there." And it was so fun because it's like, even though I'm so far away from the world, I still actually got a lot of cool interaction with some of the people I met in Gainesville.
I'm sure you've gotten to eat a lot of super good food that I'm sure everyone is dying to eat post-pandemic, to travel and eat good food again.
Oh my gosh, yes. Florida is an Asian food desert as far as things go. So I'm definitely missing some of the dim sum and some of like the other delicacies out there.
And did you speak Tagalog before going to the Philippines, or did you have to learn, or did you have to brush up on your language skills?
So I actually was pretty conversant in Tagalog before I moved to the Philippines. My roommate in college actually was also spoke Tagalog pretty well, so he kept me sharp when I was in college. So shout out to my roommate Jan Matt for keeping my Tagalog pretty fluid while I was in college. But when I moved out there, of course, our mode of instruction was actually in English. But once we went to the clinics and we're treating a lot of the patients in our service wards, they didn't speak much English. So I really had to brush up on my Tagalog. I didn't want to miss anything in patient histories or relay any information incorrectly, since labs were also done in English. So I definitely took it upon myself. So I need to get my Tagalog better to make sure I don't, negatively impact anyone's care. So that was fun. But a funny thing is, my parents speak a very specific dialect of Tagalog. It's very countryside, rural, kind of like a southern drawl, if you would, compare English. And I speak Manila Tagalog, so I speak city Tagalog. And my cousins made fun of me for speaking like a city boy, but I'm like, okay, I'm not a city boy. I'm actually from America. So that was pretty fun. It's just one of those fun little cultural things that ended up happening to me out there.
That's funny. And lastly, I just want, and you did a quick shout out, but we can do shout outs at the end, but any final advice for current students at UF, and what advice do you have to share?
I think one of I think it's important advice is kind of trying to find that balance. As I guess we prefaced with this podcast, I kind of did a little bit of everything. And I kind of do wish, going back, that I was able to kind of just hone in on what exactly I want to spend a significant amount of time in, because, we are there to get an education, to further our careers and our passions, and to also kind of find out what we love. And I think that if you can kind of hone down maybe one or three passions you're really into, and kind of devote your time to that would be really great. And to just kind of I mean, it's hard now with the pandemic, but just, just kind of enjoy the time when you're there, because I think there was actually a time where I just kind of thought like, wow, this is so idyllic. There's this wonderful community. It's a college town. It feels like how the movies are. And I think just kind of going to school with that sense of gratefulness every day and that kind of sense of appreciation that, I am part of the Skater Nation. I'm making these really important bonds and having this really, positive experience. That gratitude will take you far. And that's kind of what I carry with myself too from my experience at UF.
Yeah, that resonates with me. +1 on that. Our other guests have talked about that too. And I think that really honing in on like what your passions are, it's really like, again, like a time to trial new things that you might have not ever, you might not ever be involved in public service again. But if you wanted to serve in SGA and student government at the time, that's your time to try. And maybe you never want to do public service again in your future life. But like you said, that's like the time to try it and the time to like test the waters and see if you actually like it or not. You never know. You might even find a passion that you didn't even know before.
Exactly. It's funny you bring that up, because even though I've been in school for like 9 million years, because of my experience at UF with student government, I am considering getting more education and health policy. So, it's definitely one of those things I just kind of fell into, and it ended up being a very formative part of what I think I want to do with my life. So, all around, a lot of gratitude, a lot of appreciation for, I guess, definitely how I spent my time at UF.
And finally, any shout outs you want to thank anyone from your time at UF, any friends, anyone you want to shout out on the podcast?
Oh, definitely. I think I definitely want to shout out to my really good friends, Jan, Matt, my roommate, and Izzy Wan. They're getting married this weekend, and I'm excited to see everyone make another little UF reunion. So congrats to the newlyweds. I also would like to, I guess, give a shout out to my FLP co-directors, Kayla Tran, Monica Dirtata-Harja, William Yang. Miss you guys. And, I've been on a lot of e-boards, but just a shout out to, I guess, everyone that I've ever served on an e-board with. It's every experience I've had at UF was pleasant, had a positive outcome, was a great pleasure. And I guess lastly, a shout out to a lot of my friends, shout out to the Diamond Cutters, shout out to the Mew class, shout out to my blood brother who followed my footsteps at UF, and just I guess that might be it. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Jon, for sharing. It's been really fun to like catch up with you and talk to you on the podcast. I think that like your reach like of different groups of people just shows and when you were involved on campus, and just really like that type of person, keeping connections and really staying connected with folks that you were friends with on campus. Also, it was just a true testament to your personality and your character. And thanks for taking the time to talk to me on the podcast.
Of course. It was tons of fun. Always great speaking to you. Always great catching up. And you made me very nostalgic.
I know. Everyone's going to be like, oh, let's think of these memories. But again, thank you, Jon, for joining me on the podcast today. I want to thank everyone who's listening and also watching on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you find our podcasts. And I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye. Thanks for having me, Vi. Bye.
Thanks again to Jon for sharing your story with us on the podcast. If you're interested in learning more, take a look at the links in our show notes of this episode. On behalf of the UF Association of Asian Alumni, thanks for listening to When I Became a Gator podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast wherever you find this episode. To find out more, please visit ufasianalumni.com.